Welcome back, everyone, to Collin Earl's The House of Grey. Whoa, Artorius is a beast on the football field. Hope those players he manhandled get to leave the medical wing soon. This week, the story so far goes something like this. With Artorius now on the Legion, after a fantastic tryout, things might be looking up for our trio. Monson has his hands full with classes, Taurus Green's flirting with him, and the mystery that surrounds Cyan Harrison. Despite the continuing onslaught of harassment from Derek Dayton and his groupies, Monson has developed a deeper friendship with Casey and Artorius. Now, if he could just figure out what to do about Artorius' girl obsession. Hold on tight for Episode 11. Over the next few weeks, things changed just a bit for Monson and his friends. Artorius was quickly inducted into the Legion's ranks, and in light of his new status, some of the animosity against Monson seemed to die down, or at least slow to a simmer. This improved Monson's everyday life at the school, even if it was just a slight difference. The various sports team members that were so enthusiastic about harassing him in the past seemed to find other things of interest, and eventually, they regarded him with indifference. He was still receiving all kinds of mistreatment from Derek and his groupies, many of which were on the football team. However, they were less aggressive these days as school and other pressures started to mount on the whole of the student body. The school held the official tryout for the Legionnaires' football team during the first week of September on the main field of the battlegrounds. This 3-day event was quite the spectacle. The lateness of the event did not seem to matter much as the tryouts were something of a formality, since most of the team was hand-picked by Coach Abel to begin with. Most of the student body attended the event since the school created a holiday for the occasion. Many people, including college recruiters, newscasters, and A-list celebrities, came out in droves as they cased the potential stars for this year's team. Monson showed up, as promised, and did his little PR dance, even though he was still upset with Coach Abel for what he attempted with Artorius. Despite this, he made a promise, and he was not one to go back on his word. His actual part was not all that eventful. He repeated the answers that he rehearsed in response to a few non-intrusive, totally expected questions. Then Coach Abel shuffled Monson away, wanting him scarce so the coach could promote the team. Afterwards, Monson felt annoyed, not really because of the Q&A. He had gladly answered their questions. He was annoyed because they really did not care about what he had to say. They seemed more interested in gawking at him than anything else. He also felt a stab of irritation when Coach Abel shot him a father-figure smile when some reporter asked about their relationship. Monson could not help but feel like a puppet in all this. It was not a feeling he enjoyed very much, even if he did agree to the deal. There was an upside to this agreement. Coach Hawk. The man was hilarious, absolutely hilarious. Abel had assigned Coach Hawk to prepare Monson for his screen time with the reporters. "You have to feel your answer, Grey," Coach Hawk had said on more than one occasion. "Only then will your noble blood be seen." Noble blood? Monson remembered saying. "What's noble about my blood?" "I come from prosperous stock, deep with tradition and honor. I am positive you carry within you a rich heritage, passed down by countless generations of Greys. Upon your shoulders rests the hopes and dreams of innumerable progenitors, all looking to you for the culmination of their ancestral wishes to be fulfilled." Coach Hawk had answered as if this were the most obvious answer. Right. All of their planning sessions proceeded in that manner, during which Monson and Hawk became friends. Honestly, Coach Hawk's bubbly personality made it almost hard not to, and he was so kind to Monson, which was a bonus. The actual tryout was very interesting to watch. Running drills, learning plays, and the countless repetition of movement made for an exhausting event. It was obvious it was all completely for show. This tryout was definitely more of a publicity stunt than an actual determining factor for avoiding the cut list. Corn flaunted the event in the hopes that the many people interested would make the trip to campus. Publicity. It was all about publicity. an opportunity to show the world a glimpse of this truly elite institution. It appeared to work. There were many people here. The players played hard. This may have been all fluff for the school, but to them it was still football. Monson grew tired just watching them. He had to wonder whether there was a real chance for Casey. The varsity squad felt well established in their respective positions. He had spent a great deal of time worrying about Casey. In the end, his concern was misplaced. Casey played very well, so well that even from the very beginning of the tryouts, it was hard not to notice him. The reason for his success was probably his speed. The boy could move unbelievably fast and displayed reflexes to match his quickness. More than once, he left other players totally in his dust. Many reporters noticed this ability. That, probably more than anything else, carried him all the way to the final varsity cut. Regrettably, he was finally let go in favor of a senior student. Casey was obviously better, but the boy was a 2-year starter and his father was on the board of directors for the school. Thus, Corin's politics reared its ugly head. Casey was not the only thing of interest during the tryouts. Damian Peterson also made an appearance, which seemed unexpected to most of the guests, as it was obvious that he was already on the team, and he was not much for public appearances. Monson was surprised when he showed up mid-morning on the second day of tryouts. Damian walked out of the massive tent-like structure reserved for authorized personnel only. He glanced around calmly as he surveyed the scene. From the crowd's expressions, you would have guessed that this was some awe-inspiring individual. Monson's view of Damian was gone the minute he walked out of the trailer, as the waiting media and fans instantly mobbed him. He felt excited about Damian's cameo for a multitude of reasons, the primary one being that this was the first time he was actually going to see the sports phenom, aside from that glimpse the first day of school. Granted, that was fairly recent, but still. Of course, this was not totally true, as they had competed against each other in the Knowledge Bowl. Since Monson could not remember that, he decided it didn't count. He found himself watching Damian out of simple curiosity. The kid had an unbelievable amount of hype as a student athlete. Active in baseball, basketball, and football, people speculated that he could go professional in any one of the three. Despite his underage, he was a regular at the hottest night spots in LA and New York, and supposedly occupied more covers of magazines than Michael Jordan. Monson had not known who Michael Jordan was, but Casey said it was a big deal. ESPN's local edition said that Damian Peterson's type of talent was born once in a generation, and this very talent would be responsible for 3 state titles in 3 different sports for Collin. All of this mattered very little to Monson. Sports? Psh, whatever. No, the thing that made him curious was that his mere association with Damian was the reason for much of his grief in the early days of school. He wanted to know about the guy himself. Was he as bitter as many of his classmates? How did it feel to have the world literally bowing down at your feet? What did the limelight do to you on a personal level? Interesting questions indeed. He hoped he might be able to find the answer to a few of them. Damian seemed confident, but not haughty, not like Derek. He spoke with reporters and teammates, always gently, smiling with a light, friendly expression. He seemed very likable, almost too likable if truth be told. He was also very good-looking, commanding the attention of just about everyone, male and female, wherever he went. No wonder the kid stayed out of sight. This kind of attention might be fun for a little while, but it must get old at some point. Monson also quickly found an added benefit to Damian's presence. Everyone left him alone. Apparently, at least for the time being, the scarred little freshman Hormveer was just not as interesting as the sports god. Monson did not mind. It was nice to get out of the spotlight. Damian was active, that much was certain. It seemed he was always doing something, talking to someone or going somewhere. He moved from group to group, greeting, shaking hands, and smiling absent-mindedly. All in all, Damian seemed just about perfect. Either that or he was a really good actor. Hours proceeded like this in a quasi-circus atmosphere with sports stars and A-listers mulling around the grounds. Artorius and Monson idled the time away watching Casey. Artorius was in constant chatter concerning the who's who of famous people, and it seemed to never end. Both remained on the side bleachers away from the throng until a sticky situation snuck up on them. Damien actually passed by right where they were sitting. It was like magic. 1 minute there was chatter and laughter, and the next, silence, as Damien stood not 10 feet from them. This was a tense moment for Monson, as he still was not sure how the sports star would react to him. Damien's eyes fell upon the two of them, despite the fact that he was attempting to divide his conversation amongst a half a dozen other people. Dirty blonde hair fell messily into hazel-brown eyes. His eyebrows were prominent, his jawline robust, and his stubble masculine. He reminded Monson of a much younger version of that actor who played Aragorn in that movie he saw in the hospital. Looking at Damien's face, he felt trickles of memory like melting wax permeate his consciousness. He was starting to remember the diamond. Damien turned towards Monson and Artorius, who were both staring like deer in headlights, and gave them a half wave. Then, turning back towards his gaggle of girls and groupies, he continued off towards a group of waiting reporters. "Was he waving at you or me?" Monson looked confusedly at Artorius. "I don't know. I don't know him personally. Do you?" "Not that I know of, but then again I thought I saw him wave after orientation, too." Artorius looked towards the still retreating Damien. "Weird." Damien's cryptic actions aside, the day passed with ease. Football players and famous people were interesting to watch, even if Monson did not know most of them. The excitement was something that you could cut with a knife as students mingled with the up-and-coming. Much to his enjoyment, Monson remained separated from it all. There were no dirty looks or whispered conversations. It was just he and Artorius, relaxing. Despite his relief from the normal tumult, he knew it was too good to last. Speakers started to play an entrance song, kind of like the ones that pro wrestlers use trying to be flashy. Hearing this music, the male population of the school went wild, as if suddenly infected by some rabies-like virus. They ran and stacked up in front of a large raised platform, literally drooling in anticipation. Artorius, who had moments earlier left for the bathroom, ran up to Monson at a breakneck speed. He stopped suddenly and almost fell over. He righted himself, not missing a beat. Gray, we gotta move or all the good seats will be taken." He pulled Monson up and started to drag him. His next words sounded a bit desperate. "Man, we're not gonna be able to see anything if we don't hurry." "What aren't we going to be able to see, Artorius? What are you on about?" Artorius's eyes bulged comically. "You don't know?" Monson sighed. Of course he didn't know. He never knew. Artorius gave him a wide, slightly devious smile. "The cheerleading squad is performing, Gray. The cheerleading squad." For what Monson could piece together after that, a cheerleading squad was a group of girls that went to the various sporting events and cheered for their school. Corrin's squad accompanied all the major teams to their respective matches, and apparently, this was a big deal. At first, this all sounded somewhat silly to Monson. Why would the games need something like that? It seemed like a sort of waste of time and resources to him. It was not until he saw the girls in their cheerleading attire that he decided how wrong he was. The girls wore short crimson skirts with gold trim, cropped higher than mid-thigh, showing off the strong tanned legs of the squad members. Assumingly, the design of their attire was to make their acrobatic feats easier, but Monson was sure that that was not the only reason. Sleeveless white and gold tops that did not quite cover the midriff begged for recognition from anyone fortunate enough to be close to the girls. Stark white shoes with no visible sock rounded out the outfit and gave the blatantly sexualized clothing a wholesome, hometown-like feel. Despite the attempted quaintness, he could not quite shake the feeling that really, he should be averting his eyes. Understandably, many of the cameramen and reporters seemed just as enthralled by the cheerleading practice as the male members of the student body were. Predictably, and more than once, Monson caught them ogling the girls. The cheerleaders, their uniforms, and their cumulative intended effect could all be lumped into the whole premise of Corin's 3-day affair. There were just too many wealthy, beautiful girls at this school not to make an event of the whole ordeal. Again, leave it to the rich and powerful to make something bigger than it is. The tryouts, the media, the cheerleading squad, all of it came as a great shock to Monson, having never seen anything resembling it before. As the squad finished their practice, his shock hit a new level. Taurus and Indigo, both wearing cheerleading attire, came up to him and seemed to fight for his attention as they spoke.
"So, what do you think?"
Indigo twirled in a circle, holding the skirt with the tips of her fingers.
"I look good, don't I?"
Monson found himself thinking how good she did look. It was just hard, when the whole thing obviously affected Artorius. He tried his best to answer.
Yeah, I think you look rather nice."
She beamed.
"Monson, there you are. Where have you been, Grey? I've been looking all over for you."
Monson gave Taurus a confused look.
"Where have I been?" he thought. "I've been right here, in front of you, the entire time." "Taurus, what are you talking about? Who's your friend?"
She glared at Indigo. Indigo returned her nasty sneer, but did not answer.
"Anyway,"
Taurus continued as if Indigo was not even there.
"Monson, what were you saying? Oh, that's right. You were telling me how good I look in my uniform. He was telling you, or you were forcing him to do so?"
The conversation progressively grew worse from there. Finally, he and Artorius were able to extricate themselves from the polite yet furious girls. He made a mental note to try to keep those two away from each other in the future. After the tryouts and the season openers for football, volleyball, and a variety of other sports, life settled down again and students were able to fall into a routine. By the time they had noticed, a whole month had passed without even batting an eyelash.
"Please study these pictures for a moment,"
said Mr. Gatt one cold Friday afternoon in mid-October.
"What do you see?"
The class looked at the board in concentration. Another picture, similar to the one Mr. Gatt displayed the first day of class, sat in the center of the blackboard. A beautiful painting depicting two individuals, one male and one female, in the act of a romantic embrace, became the center of the class's attention. The painting was set in a forest, ripe with leaves, yet somewhat foreboding. The duo was in the exact middle of the frame, drawing attention to the center. The man wore a torn, bloody shirt, and while thin, he had an ample amount of muscle sculpted with rippling biceps and defined shoulders. His skin was dark gray and looked sickly. His eyes were a deep, blood red, and finely detailed. While the color threw the viewer off just a bit, you could see that they were soft and compassionate, maybe even humble. His disposition seemed passive, almost apprehensive, like he was unsure of the righteousness of his current embrace. Nevertheless, he held the woman close, cradling her as if she was the one thing he held most dear. He loved her. Monson was certain of it. This man, or whatever he might be, loved this woman with all his heart. The woman was memorable as well. She had striking beauty, with long, silver-black hair and proud, icy blue eyes. The expression she wore seemed torn, though the reason for this emotional discord seemed lost in the poetic translation. Why was she looking at him like that? What was she feeling? The woman's hand touched his chest, skirting the edges of the deep lacerations on his upper torso. Both their clothing appeared tattered, as if this meeting was accidental, in the midst of a battle. Streaks of fiery red, that was assumedly blood, trickled down massive white wings that flared from the woman's back like billowing clouds.
"Who are these people?"
Monson thought.
Or better yet, what are they?
A girl 2 rows down from Monson raised her hand to answer. Mr. Gatt pointed at her. She gestured towards the left side of the painting.
"I don't know about anyone else, but he looks like a goblin or something."
Snickering rippled through the class as people pondered the statement. Mr. Gatt smiled.
"You are not completely off, Mindy. However, Not exactly what I was looking for. Yes, Simon.
It was one of the twins. The two of them always seemed to be together.
Well, I don't know about the goblin-looking thing, but the woman looks like an angel.
Mr. Gatt nodded in approval.
Well done, Simon. Please, continue. Why do you believe that this woman looks like an angel?
Confused, Simon answered.
The wings, of course. The woman has angel wings.
Well, no. Perhaps you misunderstand the question. How did you know that the woman with the angel wings is in fact an angel?
Simon shook his head.
I don't really know.
Exactly.
If there was a punchline there, Monson definitely missed it, as did most of the class. Mr. Gatt did not explain his statement, but turned towards the sliding board and pushed it up out of the way. Bending down, he reached for what looked like a digital projector. He hooked it up to his MacBook as he started to speak again.
This painting was discovered in an underground tunnel system on the outer reaches of Carthage in northern Africa. The entrance remained hidden for hundreds of years due to the shifting sands and winds of that region. The tunnel system, covering many miles, contains hundreds of Punic documents. Can anyone elaborate on the significance of this?
No one answered.
Mr. Garrett, how about you?
Mr. Gatt gestured towards the boy in the wheelchair. The boy went pale as he looked around at the class. He shied away, but answered in a soft voice, barely above a whisper.
I'm sorry, Mr. Gatt. I don't have the slightest clue.
Mr. Gatt looked disappointed. This was the boy's response every single time. An uncomfortable silence settled over the students. Monson, however, thought he knew the answer. He raised his hand.
Yes, Mr. Grey. Wasn't the city of Carthage destroyed by the Romans in 146 BC? Please continue. All the historical records were destroyed by the Romans, making it difficult to study the Carthaginian history. This is problematic. Carthage was one of the largest and longest living empires in the Mediterranean, and yet we know very little about them. Excellent, Mr. Grey. Very well done.
He looked around at the rest of the class.
This discovery is one of the major finds of the 21st century, marking not only the end of a very long silence concerning the Carthaginians, but it may also show some indication that they may not have been as lost as originally thought.
Silence ensued. Mr. Gatt continued.
Mr. Grey, will you answer me another question?
Monson hesitated.
Okay, shoot. If I asked you to date this painting, what would your educated guess be?
Monson looked at Taurus. She shook her head. Apparently she did not know any better than he did. He squinted his eyes and with all his mental might gazed at the painting. Something about it seemed off. He thought he knew what it was.
It looks a great deal similar to that one you showed us the first day of class. I would guess it's from an adjacent period.
Mr. Gatt smiled at this.
Do you have any basis for your assumption?
Monson shook his head.
Nope. Just a hunch.
Mr. Gatt laughed this time.
Well, Mr. Grey, your hunch is precisely accurate.
Monson paused at this.
Wait, Mr. Gatt. Yes, Mr. Grey. How could these be from the same time period? I mean, if the picture of Merlin was, 17th century, and this painting found in a Carthaginian stronghold, how on earth could they be done around the same time?
Most of the students looked confused at his words. Whispers broke out as he started to speak again.
What I'm trying to say is, the timeline seems screwed up. I mean, if that tunnel was sealed BC, how could a painting from 1600 years later appear in it? That is a very good question.
Mr. Gatt stopped talking and simply smiled. Monson stared at him. Mr. Gatt was fiddling with the MacBook. It was starting to frustrate him. His eyes were straining as he played with the keyboard. His taps on the keyboard were becoming progressively louder with each stroke.
Oh, I do apologize for this.
He looked at the class, his face apologetic.
I have many talents. However, computers has never been one of them.
The class was silent as they continued to watch. Suddenly, Mr. Gatt stepped back from the MacBook and stared at it. He looked as if he was trying to decide something.
Derek, will you please go and flip that second light switch for me?
Mr. Gatt motioned toward Derek, then towards the wall where the light panel was. Derek stood up and walked towards the switch. His glance shifted back towards where Monson and Tara sat. He gave Monson a sour look, then turning towards the light switch, he flipped it. The lights flickered off, and the old classroom became dark.
Thank you, Derek. That should do it. Please turn the lights back on.
Derek flipped the switch again, and the lights came back on. Almost simultaneously, a flash came from the front of the room, as if one of the lights had burned out. At once, the class heard the chime of the MacBook, and light shot out from the projector. The whole thing confused Monson. Why did flicking the lights off and on turn on the computer? He stared at Mr. Gatt, who looked annoyed for some reason, though Monson could not figure out why. The computer was on, right?
Unfortunately, this building is very old.
Mr. Gatt spoke to the class, not looking away from the computer screen.
The electrical system at times prevents electronics from working properly.
The bell abruptly rang, and Monson caught a glimpse of the image projected on the screen. A humanoid, skeletal-looking figure, who was propped against a grainy wall in a dark, sandy-looking room flashed across the screen before the projector faded to black. The picture looked like it was underground. He thought humanoid because the skeleton looked like it had extra limbs. Maybe it was deformed. He pictured the image in his mind. It reminded Monson of those human-looking monkeys that scientists claim to be the ancestors of the human race, the whole missing link thing. Maybe this was another long-forgotten race of early developed humans. He cocked his head as he reviewed the picture in his mind. He was not one to put much stock into that whole evolution thing, but maybe it had some truth to it. Who knew? Students started to move, packing up their things. Taurus, like always, lingered for a moment. That is, until Derek came striding over. It was like clockwork. Derek would show up. She would smile as he attempted to engage her in conversation, all while letting her fingers fly on the keypad of her phone. Seconds later, a text would appear on Monson's phone about how distasteful she found him. Texting had become the primary mode of communication for he and Taurus. In fact, ever since Artorius' tryout, the little flying envelopes came non-stop. He still needed to change her name on his phone. His phone vibrated. He flipped it open and read her message. From my princess.
You coming to practice today? Yellow smiley face ?
Monson typed back. To my princess.
Yeah, I guess.
From my princess.
Good. I will see you later.
Make sure you miss me! ! Winking smiley face. He did not have an answer for that one. He watched as she walked away and laughed at the look on Derek's face as she moved rapidly away from him. The dismissal was not lost on Derek, obviously upset by the slight. Derek's attention quickly snapped onto Monson.
What are you laughing at, Grey?
Monson smiled pleasantly back. Just the voices in my head, Derek. Derek scowled.
You and your mouth are going to get you into trouble.
Don't I know it? He continued to smile. Derek leaned in towards him.
I hope you're enjoying yourself. I don't suspect it will last much longer.
Monson placed a hand to his temple as if he were coming down with a headache. More of the same thing. He had to wonder what wrong he had inflicted on Derek in a past life. Was Derek ever going to get over whatever it was that put his panties in a twist?
I believe we had this conversation before. What is it now, Derek?
Derek's smile looked tainted, slightly deranged.
I wouldn't want to ruin the surprise.
He walked away before Monson could answer. He was not scared of Derek. Really, there was no reason to be. After all, there was not much he could do about Derek's animosity. There were plenty of rumors already to keep most people away from Monson. So, unless Derek could figure out how to effectively incite the rest of the student body against him, there was really no reason to be afraid at all. Monson stood up and started to gather his things, moving slow to make sure he was the last person out of the class. He found that if he simply allowed most of the students to precede him, that he could avoid some of the potentially undesirable altercations. He learned this lesson the hard way, however, as it took several weeks of harassment before coming up with the strategy.
"Forgive my intrusion, Mr. Grey. You look troubled."
Mr. Gatt spoke to him in a conversational tone. Monson almost instinctively steered himself away from the door and towards Mr. Gatt at the front of the room.
"No, not really. Just your normal high school stuff."
Mr. Gatt's smile faded to a look of concern.
"Normal high school stuff, you say? You know, Mr. Grey, just as a reminder, you can depend on your teachers. We are fairly dependable people."
Monson laughed. He really did like this man.
"I appreciate the offer, Mr. Gatt, but I'm not one to depend on other people. Besides, there isn't a great deal you could do anyway. You might be surprised what I am able to accomplish."
He gave Monson a wry smile. Monson was not paying attention as he was thinking about the image that was on the screen.
"Oh, sorry, what was that?" "Never mind, Mr. Grey."
Monson changed the topic of conversation. He had to know what that picture was. He gestured toward the projection screen.
"I hadn't heard that the Carthaginians' records were found. An underground tunnel system in the middle of the North African desert? Who would have thought? Something that big. You think it would have been all over the news." "It was."
Mr. Gatt smiled lightly as if he were trying to soften the blow he was about to dole out.
"It made national news. When you were in the hospital."
"Well, that would explain it." He did his best to keep any type of emotion out of his voice.
"What about the mutant-looking skeleton guy? Where's that little lead taking us?"
Mr. Gatt smiled as he shook his head and murmured something that sounded similar to mutant. Apparently, he found Monson's use of the word very amusing.
"The mutant, as you put it, is leading us to a lost part of history, a legend that is as a part of humanity as the Roman Empire itself."
Mr. Gatt went into his sermonizing, oratory voice, the one that could attract attention like flies to, well, flypaper. He really wanted Monson to listen to what he was about to say. Monson listened intently, far more intently than the situation warranted. Mr. Gatt parted his lips.
"Atlantis."
"Atlantis?"
"Yes, Atlantis."
Monson stared at Mr. Gatt in surprise.
"That's not what I was expecting."
Mr. Gatt looked sympathetic.
"I do not doubt that, Mr. Grey. It was indeed surprising, even to me. I guess I'm confused."
Monson scratched his head.
"What does the lost continent of Atlantis have to do with the Carthaginians and the skeleton guy?" "What indeed?"
Mr. Gatt continued to look at him.
"Quickly now, Mr. Grey, or you might be tardy for your next class." "Oh, man."
Monson rushed out the door without a glance backward.
"See you on Monday, Mr. Grey."
Monson ran out the door of the building, down the path, and cut through the foliage surrounding the immediate area, though he did not get very far. He ran straight to where two pathways merged and was about to take the corner wide, but stopped when he heard voices. Hastily, he flattened himself against the bush wall. "Could you give me back my book, please?" He recognized the boy in the wheelchair's voice.
"I'm doing you a favor, Grayson. You aren't ever going to be cool if people see you reading Star Wars novels all the time."
Monson's lips pursed.
"Derek."
There was laughing all around. From the sound of it, there were more than just Derek and the boy in the wheelchair. "I think I'm okay with people thinking I'm uncool." Grayson's voice sounded meek but calculating, much like that first day when he caught Monson spying on that girl.
Oh, that girl.
He never did find out who she was.
"Focus,"
a voice screamed in his head. He ripped his attention back to the conversation.
"Grayson, I don't think you understand the significance of what I'm asking you, not to mention the benefits involved.
Derek's voice sounded like he was quickly growing annoyed. He was so easy to read.
And I told you already.
Grayson sounded annoyed as well.
I don't know anything more than you do.
Derek sighed loudly, almost theatrically. He snapped his fingers. There was tearing noises, and the sound of pages fluttering in the wind.
My patience is wearing thin, Grayson. Bring me what I'm looking for, or things are going to get ugly. I told you I don't have...
There was the sound of something smacking skin, like a stick slapping a flat surface. Then, silence. Monson felt stunned.
Did Derek just hit him?
He whispered to himself.
I want that information, Grayson. You have no idea how badly I need it.
Monson started to walk out from behind the bush wall. Enough was enough. He strolled towards Grayson, Derek, and 2 of his goons. It was only a moment until they noticed him. He did some quick thinking and picked up his pace.
Hi. Hey, Grayson. There you are.
He tried to make his voice slightly winded, as if he had been running a long distance.
Hey, thanks for waiting for me. Oh, hey, Derek.
It was evident that Monson's appearance surprised them all. He could see it written all over their faces. Grayson recovered quickly and started to play along. He smiled as he looked at Monson. The left side of his face was red and looked like it was starting to swell slightly. He answered with a calm, controlled voice.
Jeez, Monson. What took you so long? I was waiting for you.
Monson thought quickly.
Yeah, sorry. Mr. Gatt needed to ask me something. He's on his way down here so we can, all go together.
Derek and his goons were shifting around, obviously uncomfortable with this sudden turn in events. Surprisingly enough, Derek turned towards Monson.
Yeah, Derek?
Monson looked at him.
Nothing. I just wanted to imprint your image on my mind.
He turned from Monson and addressed Grayson.
You've got 4 days.
With that, he walked off, his goons trailing behind him. Monson watched them walk away. Then, rounding on Grayson, he started to speak. Grayson cut him off.
You really don't want to know. Oh, come on. I just walked into a scene straight out of The Godfather. Don't tell me not to ask.
Grayson's demeanor changed slightly. He stared down towards his feet.
You can't help me, Monson. It'll just get worse if you do.
Monson glared at him.
Something about you just isn't right. You know that?
Grayson looked at him as if he did not understand.
Why, whatever could you mean?
Monson detected a hint of sarcasm.
Never mind.
He let out a deep breath and looked in the direction of his next class and then back at Grayson. There was something he had to do before he could leave.
Monson Grey.
He offered his hand. Grayson did not take it, but looked at him with a curious expression.
We never did introduce ourselves. It's been driving me nuts.
Grayson laughed, sounding genuinely amused.
Grayson Garrett.
He took Monson's hand.
Nice to meet you.
They shook hands for a brief moment, then let go, still smiling. Grayson spoke up.
Don't you have gym now?
Monson blanched. In the excitement, he totally forgot about his 6th period. He could kick himself. This was the 2nd time in like 10 minutes. How did that happen? He laughed.
Yeah, I better go.
He turned to leave, but then stopped again.
You better put some ice on that eye. It's, starting to swell. I'll do that.
Monson started off again, almost running towards the gym.
What a weird encounter. Derek and Grayson? What could they have been talking about?
He thought. Thoughts continued to bounce around in his head when he remembered something.
Wait.
He stopped and turned around. He searched for Grayson.
Grayson?
He spoke out loud to himself.
How did you know what class I have next? No. Gray, You're doing it totally wrong. Casey was yelling at Monson again. Casey might have been a brilliant fighter and fencer, but he was a terrible teacher. Casey looked at him, frustration all over his crinkled, old man-like face. The two-step, he walked towards Monson with his balkin in hand, is a feeling-out maneuver. It isn't anything decisive. They were in gym now, going through the beginning forms of a sword-fighting style called Ja-No. Monson was having a difficult time with one of the style's first and most important moves. Called the two-step, this move was the current bane of Monson's existence. Unfortunately, they could not just move on, as the two-step was the base for everything else in the Ja-No. The fencing lesson came out of nowhere as Artorius' idea. He, like Casey, thought that Monson moved like a fencer, and therefore wanted to see where lessons would take him. Monson had been learning the style for about a month now, and contrary to initial speculation, he found out quickly that he did not have any talent for it. Time was also an issue. They never seemed to have enough time. They would start, and then the period would end. Time just seemed to melt together. Today was no different, worse even. They had even less time than usual. Monson's fault, of course. By the time he had arrived at the yard for his gym class, he was already 20 minutes late. He really needed to stop blowing things out of proportion. He thought of Grayson. He sighed. Back on the pathway between the yard and Mr. Gatt's classroom, he realized that there could be any number of reasons Grayson could know that he had sixth period gym. Just being stupid, he told himself. Stop being so paranoid. After this self-inflicted verbal lashing, he had run full out towards the yard, moving to make up for lost time. Casey and Artorius were only a little annoyed at having to wait for him, but were quickly pacified when he relayed what happened between Grayson and Derek. He did not tell them the whole story, however, as they really needed to start their practice. Currently, Casey was going through the beginning maneuvers of the two-step and its footwork. Monson Grey, that's the most horrible two-step I've ever seen. Casey moved slightly to pop Monson on the head. Monson blocked him with his own balkin. Bite me, Casey. This is hard. Artorius chuckled. You were one to talk, Casey. Do you remember when I was teaching you the two-step? You weren't so cocky then. Casey flushed slightly at Artorius' comment, but then shot back. Yeah? And who's better now? Artorius waved a huge hand. Details, details. He stood up. Let me show you, Grey. Artorius walked forward, an unbelievably long sword in his hand. This sword was black and looked a bit thicker than Monson and Casey's. Monson found out in some of their first lessons that this was not a balkin at all, but another type of mock blade called a subarito. The subarito was to the norachi what the balkin was to the katana. The subarito and balkin were the practice weapons made in the likeness of their deadlier counterparts. The subarito was quite a bit longer and heavier than the balkin, and carried the disadvantages that came with increased size and weight. This did not bother Artorius, however. He was so strong that the extra length of the blade helped him to counter the speed of someone like Casey. As his two friends squared up to one another, Monson thought of what it would be like if they were using real swords. It was not something he wished to find out. The sound of Artorius' voice jarred Monson out of his contemplation. The two-step initiates contact, which allows for a variety of different interactions, depending on how your opponent reacts to you feeling him out. Monson was listening properly now. For example, Artorius took 2 quick steps towards Casey, making 2 quick thrusts towards his chest. Casey blocked the blows by sweeping his blade in front of his body, his blade pointed downward. Artorius stopped. Did you see what happened there? Monson nodded. Good. As you saw, Casey did some simple, light cross body blocks that were strong enough to block my larger weapon. Yeah, I see that. He continued to look at the two. What I don't understand is why that move would be so important. Artorius looked at him thoughtfully, as if he was trying to formulate an answer. Let me ask you this, Grey. If you were in a fight, what would you rather do? Attack or defend?
Monson thought about it. Something about the words attack and defend stirred something inside him.
Defend, I suppose.
Artorius smiled lightly, like this was the answer he was expecting. Now, what would you say if I told you that there was no such thing as attacking or defending? Okay, now Monson was thoroughly confused.
What are you talking about? That doesn't make any sense.
It does. That's the idea behind the two-step. There is no attacking or defending. There's just fighting. Existing as one with your blade.
Monson simply stared at Artorius. Artorius stared back, a knowing expression on his face, as if he knew exactly what Monson was thinking. Artorius walked towards the center of the mat. Settling into a two-handed, on-guard stance, he started to speak, taking an overhanded swing with every completed phrase.
There is no good. There is no evil. Only me and my blade. I do not attack. I do not defend. I stand and I call. Only me and my blade. Flow with the crests of burning ice and cooling fire. I stand as one. Only me and my blade.
He stood, eyes closed, waiting. His voice boomed.
Attack me, Grey.
What?
Attack!
Monson did so. Just like in practice, he flashed forward, bringing his mock blade down at an angle, as if to cut Artorius from shoulder to hip. Artorius' eyes popped open, and he met the blow with an exact opposite attack. The two wooden blades connected with a resounding crack. They did not repose but pushed against each other. Artorius, using his size to his advantage, pushed Monson back. Monson breathed deeply as something akin to bloodlust started to surge through his veins. He tried to control the impulse. This seemed to happen every time he sparred. His hands started to ache and his blood started to boil. It was hard for him to concentrate when it happened. He tried to calm himself down. He squared up to Artorius. He leaned to shift most of his weight on his back foot, holding his blade in a two-handed grip perpendicular to his shoulder, his arms cocked above and below it, the tip pointing towards Artorius. He attacked again, this time with the two-step. Two thrusts aimed towards Artorius' chest. It was over in an instant. Artorius parried the first blow, but not the second. Instead, his massive blade met Monson's, and he pressed the attack, shifting his body to the inside. His long blade swiftly grinded along the length of the shorter mock sword, coming to rest where Monson's neck and shoulder met. Monson froze. Artorius held the wooden blade to Monson's throat, not moving an inch. Then he spoke.
The two-step is the first form in the Jah No. It is also the root of a very important principle.
Monson felt like Artorius' words were burning into his brain, and perhaps his very soul. Artorius' voice went very quiet.
The two-step is designed to teach you one very important rule. You do not attack. You do not defend. You fight. You fight, as either to attack or defend is to die. You must not just attack. You must not just defend. You must fight. That is the first principle of the Jah No.
Without noticing how or when he got there, Casey suddenly popped up at their side, starting to speak as Artorius slid the blade away from Monson's throat.
Dude, what Arthur is trying to say is that the concepts of attacking and defending compartmentalize something that should be combined as one. In a battle, no movement should be the sum of its parts, but the whole of itself. Every single blow should be attacking and defending, together. It's the mindset that's important. Being able to fight, whether it's with weapon or hand, is as much a state of mind as an actual physical attack.
Monson stared at them. He thought he understood, but something about the concept was not ringing true.
Okay, so if the state of mind is so important, why do we go through the motions so much? Wouldn't the first principle of the Jah No imply that we should focus on our state of mind?
Artorius and Casey gaped at him. Monson was surprised at their reaction.
What'd I say?
You know, Grey, you never cease to amaze me.
Artorius shook his head.
Why's that?
You were able to cut to the defining aspect of the Jah-No and the dual nature of body and mind.
A commotion cut Artorius off mid-sentence. People were running, literally dropping equipment and running. Dozens of students ran from their various activities. It was as if someone suddenly flipped a switch telling everyone to go somewhere. Artorius caught the arm of a girl from their year. It was one of the girls he had introduced to Monson and Casey their very first day of class. What was her name?
Ignace.
The girl stopped and turned, looking at him. Her eyes seemed wild with excitement. What in the world was going on?
Hey, Arthur, what's up?
She had a milky voice, smooth and sweet. Artorius gritted his teeth at the sound of his given name. He took a deep breath.
Where is the fire? Where's everybody running to?
Cyan Harrison. She has another match. Everyone's going to watch.
Monson stepped forward.
Cyan has matches every day. Just about every guy in the student body has challenged her. Why is this one such a big deal?
Ignace blushed deeply. Something about it felt off.
It's not Cyan people are going to see.
The boys stared at her. Monson spoke up.
Then who are they going to see? Well, duh. Her opponent, of course.
They were getting nowhere fast.
Okay, and who's her opponent?
The girl's eyes widened with anticipation.
The diamond.
You've been listening to the podcast-only novel of The House of Grey by Collin Earl. For more news, information, and updates, please visit houseofgreybook.com. Music by Figure of Fiends. Visit the band at myspace.com/Figure of Fiends. Cover art for The House of Grey provided by James Thane. More information at thayn.net.